In this video, I want to discuss my concerns around Shadespire. Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. So a couple of days ago I watched a video from Kiblams which was about Shadespire, and I'll put a link to it down in the description below. Now this video was a response to Vince Venturella's question of the week about Shadespire, and as things tend to do, it got me thinking. And I do have some concerns about Shadespire now that I know a bit more about it. Now the video that I did previously on Shadespire, which you can see here, has been getting a few views recently, and I think that's due to the interest of Shadespire in general. And I guess it was time really to reflect on it, because that was probably about 3 or 4 months ago, and we obviously have a lot more information now. People have got review copies, we've seen gameplay videos now, and we understand a little bit more about it. So I just wanted to answer both Kiblams and Vince and talk a little bit about what my concerns are with Shadespire. So first of all, one thing that's been mentioned is that it's designed as a gateway game to get people into miniature gaming. Now I personally don't see this, and let me tell you why. The models themselves are fantastic, there's no denying, as are all of Games Workshop's models. However, if the models are the attraction, I'm pretty sure you'd have already tried some of Games Workshop's games. Now be that games like Gore Chosen, that were very self-contained and came with some fantastic sculpts for miniatures inside that box for a really good value. If you were into skirmish games, you maybe would have tried Age of Sigmar Skirmish. If the big battle size of sort of full-size Age of Sigmar wasn't for you, and that had always been the stumbling block, you would have already tried it. So I personally don't see how it's a gateway into miniature gaming if the models are the attraction. Now when it comes to the card mechanic, for me the game, after seeing it played a few times now on different channels, feels very much like a card game with miniatures and not a miniature game with cards. Now let me clarify what I mean by that. What I mean is that actually if you took away the miniatures, the game would still play. If you just put kind of tokens down, or if they were just kind of little wooden pegs, the game would still play exactly the same. The miniatures are almost surplus to the game. The cards are what drive it, the boards, the tokens that are on the board is everything that drives the mechanics of the game. Now I guess you could say that for any miniature game, things like sort of Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar, you could say that for any miniature game. However, I think in those games it's the atmosphere of the battle, of seeing all the troops on the field, seeing the big monsters, seeing the tanks, seeing the flyers. It's a very visual game. This doesn't strike me as a very visual game. This strikes me as a card game that just happens to have miniatures as tokens, for want of a better word. And that also kind of leads me on to why I don't think that it is a sort of a gateway into miniature gaming. Now it certainly has some sort of CCG elements about it. Now I'm not sure, maybe CCG is not the right word, maybe it's more like an LCG, a living card game. Because the box game comes with the 2 factions, or the 2 warbands I should say, and an amount of cards where some are generic and can be used in any warband, and some are specific to those particular warbands. And the way the expansions are going to sell is, and if you see, I think Beasts of War have done an unboxing of the, now I forget their name now, but basically the skeletons. They've done the unboxing, and inside there's 2 decks of cards. One is specific to that death faction or that death warband, and the other set of cards are generic across, you can use them across any warband. Now this means that if you want to stay up with the meta, or you want to keep driving the game forward, or you want the choice to be able to sort of maximize your deck to give out the most wounds or the most sort of destruction, then you're going to have to buy every release. There's no plans for the cards to be sold separately as far as I'm aware. And there's also, interestingly, no plans to sell cards for existing Games Workshop miniatures. You will buy a warband, and those will be the only models you can play for that faction. The idea is that those factions are self-contained. They might bring out another Stormcast faction in the future, which plays slightly differently, but it's designed to be whatever's in the box is what you play. So there's no plans to start to use the sort of the hero models that are already out in Age of Sigmar. However, I do understand, I think that there's going to be war scrolls for these models, so you can use them at Age of Sigmar. Now it's this kind of gaming that really does drive that pay to win mentality, where people who just want to kind of get in and just give it a try, they buy the box game And if they enjoy it and they want to play it with any kind of competitive edge, I suppose, of which this game is really touted to be competitive, they're going to have to buy every warband, whether they want them or not, because the cards you'll need, and I'm assuming there'll be power creep over time, as there always is with this kind of game, the cards you need will be in the warbands that come out. Now, the speed of release is going to be an interesting one as well. We've seen recently with Warhammer 40,000 and a new edition in 8th edition, they've really churned out the number of models and the number of starting with the Death Guard and the new Primaris Marines. They've churned out them quickly. Now, I can imagine, although there's no prices confirmed for these yet, certainly as far as I'm aware, that these warbands will be around £30. There's quite a bit of plastic inside them, so for the skeleton one, for example, there's 7 skeletons in there. And I think off the top of my head there's 60 cards inside, so that's quite a bit of cardboard in there as well. So I'm guessing it's going to be around £30 UK prices. Now, there's 2 boosters coming out a month after release, which is the Skeletons and the Orcs, and the next ones to come out are Fire Slayers and Skaven, I believe. Now, if they're coming out every month, which I would be surprised at, but it's quite possible with Christmas pushing on. If they're going to come out every month and you need to buy all of the cards, that's potentially £60 per month just to keep up with the latest the latest developments of the game. Now, of course, you don't have to buy these, but if you want to play competitively, like Games Workshop are getting behind this game, you're going to have to pay them prices. Now, of course, there'll be discount online and people will get them slightly cheaper. However, the fact still remains you're going to be having to buy this. Now, the speed of release, if they do sort of 2 boosters every month, that's going to get very expensive. If they do a booster every 6 months, seems like Blood Bowl has almost gone to now, there's not been much release for that recently, that will really affect how the game plays. Because if there's too big a gap between releases, everything will get to a net listing kind of version and we'll see exactly the same armies playing against each other and the same decks. And if they release them too fast, the meta never gets a chance to settle down. People will get sort of tired of having to churn out too much money and they'll basically get sick and go away. So my concern is that it really hinges on 1, the price of the boosters, and 2, the frequency of releases. Because if this becomes just a cash cow, a bit of a cash grab, it'll certainly work in the short term, but then people will get sick of just spending on it. Especially when those players that I think initially, the people that will be attracted to this, won't be the Magic players and it won't be the X-Wing players, it'll be the Age of Sigmar players. And if they feel that they're spending money on small boosters and cards instead of their main game, Age of Sigmar, they'll very quickly get sick. That brings me on to Magic players and X-Wing players. One of the attractions of those 2 particular games is you don't have to build or paint models. Games Workshop are all about the hobby side of things. So what will happen is, if this becomes a very competitive game, we'll see less painted models, which is certainly not what Games Workshop want to see. From a purely visual point of view, especially when they're trying to talk about streaming this on their Twitch channel, it'll become quite dull. So there needs to be a real balance here between the attraction of who this game goes out to. If it goes out to Magic players and X-Wing players, we might start to see very plain looking boards with these red and blue and green models. If it's the Age of Sigmar players and the game really does take off, we might see people drifting away from Age of Sigmar, which will only hurt Age of Sigmar in the long run, but we will see some beautiful miniatures on the table. So that all feels very negative. I have to clarify this with, I actually am quite interested in this game now. I never knew much about it before and I was kind of sitting on the sidelines, but since I've been playing Star Wars Destiny, I've got a real taste for that kind of card gaming mechanic. The card and dice interaction really does interest me. So I think I'll definitely be picking up the starter set and I'll probably have a little bit of a try with that. I think it's really good value, so even if you want to buy it just as a self-contained box, sort of a board game, I think it's definitely worth picking up. But the longevity of the game and how it'll pan out in the future really does depend on where we attract new players from, how much the boosters cost, and what's the frequency of release. So, what do you think, folks? Are you excited to play this game? Are you really kind of just not really too worried about it? I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. So, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.